Hi. Hi, good afternoon. Welcome, Nadia.
Thank you very much.
Apologies because we've had sort of a slight overlap. So we were going to have a talk for about 20 minutes, and we will. I haven't decided if I will let you in on this conversation, but let's see how it goes. The objective of this slot is really because I wanted to highlight Nadia. Nadia, many of you may not know, has been sort of behind the scenes of Lights Camera Africa from almost its inception. And working with Larry and I in the background. If you read closely on a lot of the content, you'll see her name pop up. Last year, she had some clinics with some of you and generally gave advice and her time on just, tricks around presenting film, distribution, and just the issues around making films that are, well, not anti-Nollywood, because that's, again, a theme that we're trying to very much contain, because it's not about that. It's just about options and alternatives and diverse manners of telling stories. She'll have a chance to talk a bit more about herself. I'm going to ask questions that really allow her to talk more about herself. But I wanted to use this opportunity on behalf of the festival to actually thank you for all the support that you've given over the years. You've made countless introductions for our festival to filmmakers, to film organizations. You provide programming support and advice. You provide moral support and advice when I'm losing my mind and I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. She's been a great friend and supporter, and she loves Nigeria. So I want to also say, even though Nadia is British, of Jamaican origin, she's an adopted Nigerian, and we'll see a bit more we'll see why in the course of the conversation. So Nadia, welcome to Lagos again, and welcome to Lights Camera Africa. Would you like to just, in a quick sentence, just introduce yourself? I've introduced you as a film curator, but let the audience meet you, and I'll ask the next question I have for you is, why Nigeria? Why did you zero in on Nigeria? Because you seem a bit obsessed with Nigeria.
Thank you very much for welcoming me. It's always a pleasure to kind of be at these grassroots film events where you get to talk with filmmakers and obviously to interact with the audience. I think as some of you who probably work in the film industry can relate, I kind of came into film by accident. My father's a filmmaker, and I kind of had been around film, and he used to run a film festival, and the opportunity came up for me to run a film club. And so I kind of started running that, and like many years later, I kind of got the bug in terms of being around filmmakers and just understanding how their work would affect audiences, being in the cinema, seeing people go in, and then when they came out, they were changed, or there was something different in their eyes because of what they'd seen on the screen. So basically, I've done a lot of work around curating African diaspora films for audiences in the UK, and just trying to sort of develop their appetite for different types of films, and also working with filmmakers, trying to help them understand how they can get to their audiences, how they can market. And then obviously more recently, I've been focused on the Nigerian film space.
So in the Nigerian film space, you'd published a book in, what year was that?
2014.
So 2014, Nadia published the Nigerian Filmmakers Guide to Success Beyond Nollywood. Could you talk a bit to us about what Beyond Nollywood means to you in a definitive sense and sort of an ideological sense? And also, from 2014 to 2019, there has been very significant changes in the space that you and I work in. How are you feeling about that? And how are you feeling about the next phase?
Beyond Nollywood, in a sense, I suppose is my love letter to not just the Nigerian film industry, but I suppose world cinema. So I'm really quite fascinated with some of the new forms that we're seeing coming out of Nigeria. So just things like documentary films, animation, some of the music videos, etc., that don't really get a lot of attention. When we're thinking about Nollywood, it's a particular type of film or aesthetic, but I think there's so much more on the periphery of the sort of more mainstream Nollywood work, and I kind of have felt compelled to champion that. I think the other thing I've realized is that there's a lot of audiences who are hungry for something from West Africa that's just quite different to a lot of the sort of more standard Nollywood genres. And I think we probably underestimate how hungry our audiences are for something quite different. So some of that is obviously what's driven. But also, I have enjoyed championing filmmakers who are kind of on the edge, who are making stuff that maybe their audiences or people in Nigeria or elsewhere don't really accept. So even someone like Joel Benson, he's actually the first Nigerian filmmaker I worked with. I started working with him about 12 years ago, and I showed some of his very early work. So I'm kind of always, in a way, I suppose, championing the underdog. But I think what's fascinating for me about Nigeria and in terms of what I call the beyond Nollywood work is that I think it's just at its infancy. There's a lot more that can come. And I think certainly culturally, I think film is probably going to be the main thing that can change cultural perception about Nigeria and also what people think of Nigerians outside of the country. And I think maybe at times people don't realize the power of how film can really do that, and different types of films, different types of stories.
You were running a program at the BFI, the shorts, the Nolly Shorts. How did that come about? And how did you gain sort of the trust of Nigerian filmmakers to entrust their work to you in non-Nigerian? There's always, even in some of the conversations I've had with a few close people to this festival who have interrogated your expertise to me, which is another interesting thing. We're here trying to build space. We have in common the underdog agenda. You do, to an extent I do, to an extent the festival does. But then there have been moments where I've had to defend you because you're not Nigerian. And I want you to talk a bit about the relevance of ethnicity and even origin when it comes to pushing an agenda for art, which really this is. And in doing that, how you were, of course, able to succeed and get filmmakers to then entrust you as the representative of this new wave, new Nollywood, new Nigeria, whatever we want to call this space. How has that been for you?
So just to answer the first part of your question, so I started working with the British Film Institute over about 10 years ago, running at the time a festival called the Black Filmmaker Film Festival. So I've always had a relationship with them, and when I told them about my ideas in terms of Nigerian cinema and beyond Nollywood, they were quite receptive. So they've really been one of the main hosts and supporters for the programs I've had in the UK, and we brought over filmmakers. So that's been an ongoing relationship that I've had. But in terms of the second part of your question, I suppose it sounds a bit strange, but I don't really think of my filmmakers as Nigerian. It's more the kind of genres they make, because they're all different. Whether they're a documentarian, an animator. I think the thing that unites us is that we're interested in a particular aesthetic, a particular form. And so I think more of like a film family in terms of our values, because I don't think all Nigerian filmmakers have the same values. I think for me, with Beyond Nollywood, people have a particular maybe message or way they want to work, which is quite different to the more commercial Nollywood. So I think that's what unites us. Because as part of Beyond Nollywood, I do show work that's made by non-Nigerians, but about Nigeria. So it's not exclusively Nigerian. And I also show work by Nigerian filmmakers in the diaspora who don't make films about Nigeria, or sometimes even Africa. They're making other stuff. So I think there's a broader conversation. I don't think all Nigerian filmmakers have to make films about Nigeria. There's other stuff. And I think we have too much of a narrow view of the industry if we're just expecting one thing. They should be making films about other parts of the world as well, but we can still claim them as part of the Nigeria space. But in terms of my more complex relationship with Nigeria, I don't know, I feel as if the country's claimed to me. I didn't really set out or plan any of this. It just kind of happened. And I think the way I've been able to connect with filmmakers is really more our love for film as an art form. It's not really about nationality. It's really about how we understand and what we want to communicate to our audiences, and trying to do that with some level of integrity. And certainly for me, at the level I am in my film career, I want long-term relationships with people. I don't want to just show you a film and then that's it. Most of the filmmakers I work with, they're my friends. I enjoy spending time with them, even aside from their work. So I think that's really how I've been able to work with people, because it's really more about the relationship than just showing their film or the red carpet or how much money their films made at box office. I don't care about how much money filmmakers make at box office. I'm more concerned with the creative process and where they are mentally and creatively and what they want to do long term. That means more to me. And even someone like Joel, who obviously recently, it was great to see him winning his award at Venice, because I remember when he no one knew who he was, no one was interested in his work, but we were always talking about the kind of dreams and ambitions he had and the stories he wanted to tell that he felt at the time in Nigeria people were not interested in.
Would you, obviously, Joel is a great case study, I guess, of perseverance, time, sticking it out. Of course, everyone isn't going to win a Golden Lion. But what would you, I don't want to be too, trite, but what advice would you give to filmmakers in that space, artists trying to make real connections, make beautiful films, relevant, socially relevant, moving, that tend to fall into this glitch of not demanded, which means therefore not paid for in a large way. Of course, there are other ways. I also want you to talk about different ways of having your film distributed and earn money. But what would so first thing is the advice to filmmakers who are so compelled to tell these stories and are not necessarily motivated by money, but more calling. And there's so many of them, especially in a country like Nigeria, which is highly populated, and of course the creative energy is so amazing, and there's so many of them who I guess are displaced, confused. Our festival is only so tiny. There's only so much platforms like this can do. We do our best to be a home, but I know that we're not fulfilling even the full potential of what we could do. What do they do? What should they do?
Well, I think certainly filmmakers or creators in general just need to almost have a certain kind of integrity within themselves about their work. Certainly if I look at the filmmakers who've had the longest careers or more successes, the integrity stands through, and that's integrity in terms of who you are as a person, people wanting to work with you, and audiences will sense your authenticity. They'll know in terms of the work you're putting forward. So, of course, at times it's difficult and we can be compromised, but it's just understanding that whatever you put out on that screen, people are going to feel and react to. I think the other thing is that people shouldn't be afraid of using their culture. I think one of the things that is challenging in terms of some of what's happening in Nollywood, there's a lot of foreign imposition or invasion, so to speak. So people are presenting things that don't seem authentic to the culture. So it's just remembering that in the culture, and when I say the culture, could be your particular ethnic group or geographical region, there's probably things or elements that you can use that will enrich and enhance your stories rather than using American tropes or things that you've seen in Hollywood and thinking that that's going to be the most exciting thing. I think there's also something else quite important to say about language. I'm glad to see we increasingly have more, whether it's pidgin or indigenous language, but I don't think people should be afraid and think that their films always have to be in English. The language should be integral to whoever the character is or whatever the story is, because people feel that. And I think sometimes you can feel things beyond understanding a language. And there are things that can be communicated when you work in a language or in your culture that you're familiar with, which translate beyond the immediate setting. And I think this is something that people internationally want from Nigeria, but they're not seeing. They're seeing things that they think are a mimic of American, whether it be TV series or films. So I say this, like last week I was in Hamburg at a festival in Germany. People are very excited about what's coming out of Nigeria. They don't know anything about it. And they're very interested to see the culture, not to see a version of the culture that maybe people based here think people in the West want to see. They want to see the raw originality. So I think that's really important as well. And also I just think that people should be thinking about the long term. If you are in film, and it is very frustrating, and many of us will fall by the wayside, it's a lifetime's work. And so it's thinking about where do you want your work to stand in the next 10, 15 years, and understanding you're building a body of work, and how does that whole body link together? So those are some of the things that I would say. And I think the other thing, of course, is just not being afraid to admit one's failings or to sort of see where maybe things haven't gone so right and how you can improve it.
Thank you. Your book, Beyond Nollywood, the Nollywood Guide to Success, was written about 4 years ago. Was it 5 years ago?
Yeah.
It was I don't know if any of you have seen the book. It's actually there. If someone could please just grab it. It's right there. that book. Amaka, can I have it? So it's looking back, it's an interesting roll call of some of the, let me grab it. Thank you. This is the book, and this is on the cover is O.C. Ukeje, and a film still from Confusion Hour. So when you look through this book, it's sort of like a who's who and a little compendium of various people in and out of Nollywood and film. We just discussed outside that you should be updating this soon, but I wanted to talk a bit more about some of the writing work that you plan, to share that with us, your plans for any future, sort of either an upgraded version of this, or if you feel that there's more to write about than just beyond Nollywood and distributing beyond Nollywood. Is there anything else new that you would like to share through your writing?
So one thing I would say about the book is that my regret is that I didn't get to do the kind of launch in Nigeria I'd hoped. So at the time when I wrote it, I fell on the wrong side of the elections. And at that time, it was Jonathan Goodluck, whose administration were very supportive of the arts. And then obviously things changed very drastically with Buhari. And so when I wrote it, it fell on the wrong side of that. And I perhaps at the time hadn't realized how some of the connections I'd made within government, et cetera, they couldn't support because they didn't know what was happening in the country. So the book kind of fell in a way that disappoints me, and I still feel like I need to do more in terms of Nigeria. It is available on Kindle, but I know a lot of people would like a hard copy. You want to be able to see it. But I still plan to do something with it, probably a rewrite. And essentially what I wanted to do with it is to do some form of a tour, whether it's university tour or like seminars or masterclasses, because I think it's definitely a very oral culture in Nigeria. People want to talk. Of course, it's great to have a book as backup, but I think essentially the idea of having short courses or workshops and having the book as like a resource people can take away is the way that I would want people to engage with the content. But it was really in writing the book that I started to understand that there was something a bit more nuanced and complex about the films that are coming out of Nigeria. Because I think, as I've sort of related to earlier, generally there's a sort of blanket reference to Nigerian film, which is Nollywood, but it doesn't really define everything. And also, I just find it interesting that a lot of filmmakers who are either making music videos or animation, they're making some really important work, but they're not really part of the canon when we talk about Nollywood or Nigerian film. They're on the periphery.